Chapter 10 The Wife and Mother, Part 1. I'm sure we've already met, Lahore being such a small place and all, but let's reintroduce ourselves so there's no mistake. I'm Mumtaz Kashmiri. You're probably anxious to know about Daru and me. Everyone else is. But you'll have to be patient, because I'm going to tell my story my way, and Daru doesn't appear for a while. Where to begin? Certainly before Muazzam was born. Definitely before I got married. Before I went to America? No. We haven't the time to go that far back just now. Let's start in New York City. My senior year in college. The scene is the East Village. A little before midnight, on the steps of a fourth-floor walk-up on Avenue A. The date is important. October 31st. Halloween. I'm dressed as Mother Earth. Rather ironic, as you'll come to see. My roommate, Egyptian, English major, is improvising around the Cleopatra theme again. This year there's a sun motif. Ra, you know. Last year it was more Leo. So there I am, trudging up the steps, the wheat stalks on my head hitting the ceiling, when I see this cute desi guy in a white shirt and black trousers, looking ridiculously out of place but very comfortable at the same time. He catches my eye as I pass and says, "Hi." But I ignore him, because the last thing I want to deal with tonight is some conservative boy from the homeland with nothing to say. I just hope we aren't related and don't know anyone in common. The party is great. I down some excellent X, low on zip but high on joy if you know what I mean, and make out with one or two acquaintances. But at some point, you saw this coming, I find myself on the fire escape with the brown boy I'd seen before. We're dancing, just the two of us, and his name is Ozzy, and he's wickedly sexy and, what the hell, we spend the night together. So that's how it all began. 9 months later, we were married. My fault, of course, because I should have known better. I should have known I wasn't the marrying sort even then. But I didn't. Besides, I was in love. Let me say a few more words in my defense. Ozzy was magnificent. He was gorgeous, a fantastic lover, open-minded, smart, charming, funny, and he is, the most romantic man I've ever met. He feels love deeply, and he's almost belligerent about showing it. Not that he isn't horrible to most of the planet. He is. But if Ozzy loves you, you know it. You can swim in it, get a tan, or rest in its shade if you'd rather. Still, I shouldn't have married him. He proposed during a snowstorm in March, looking cold as only a Pakistani man in America can, and I said yes. Because I was in love with him, and I had no idea what marriage really meant, and I didn't know myself yet. And because of all the other wrong reasons. Because of what every mother, aunt, sister, cousin, friend, every woman from home I'd ever known had always told me, that an unspeakable future awaits girls who don't wind up marrying, and marrying well. Well being short for wealthy Pakistani bachelor. All of that advice, which New York had laughed out my window and into the Hudson, came rushing back to me, sopping wet, in that instant. And stupid or not, I said yes. Before I knew it, I was showing him off at South Asian Student Association parties, enjoying the horrified jealousy on the faces of my prim and proper colleagues. Yes, Mumtaz, that slut, had bagged herself a prince, which meant there was one less out there for them. My friends adored him. My parents were thrilled. The summer after we graduated, he from law school and I from college, we were married in Karachi, by the sea. For a while, life was perfect. His parents bought us a beautiful one-bedroom with a view of Washington Square Park. I had a fabulous, virtually non-paying editorial job at a magazine startup. Ozzy was doing 60 hours a week of trusts and estates for a big law firm, and surprisingly loving it. It's not hard to remember what things were like then, in that first year of our marriage, when we were so good together, even if my memories are a little colored now by what happened later. We went out all the time. We danced like crazy, both of us sweating and stripped by the end of the night. We had insane sex. Once, we were caught on Ozzy's desk by his office mate, who later swore he hadn't seen anything and always blushed when I spoke to him at the firm's cocktail parties. But the best part of it was the talking. I was completely open with him. Almost, at least. More open than I've ever been with anyone else. I remember what it felt like to tell him how my father used to beat my mother. Once, so badly she lost her hearing in her left ear. How my brother never cried, not even when I almost died of pneumonia and he spent the entire night awake with me in the hospital. How upset I was when I finally got my period, at 15, because I'd accepted that it would never come. Ozzy made me feel so known. He made love to my insides, filling desperate gaps and calming unbearably sensitive places. And I brought his secrets out of him as well. I remember him trying to make a joke of the fact that he'd been molested by the owner of a tropical fish store who fondled Ozzy through his track pants as my husband, then 8, tried to buy a pair of kissing gouramis. I became tender towards his obsession with cleanliness, his need to shower and wash his hands and brush his teeth many times a day. We were growing together, and I was happy. Then I got pregnant. I'd always been a condom person, but since I was regular and we'd both tested negative, Ozzy and I switched to the rhythm method, which can be almost as reliable as the pill. Almost. I told Ozzy about it, sadly, because I'd decided to have an abortion. But he was ecstatic. I'd never seen him so happy. He told me I had to think about it for a week. And he did something I still haven't forgiven him for. He told his mother. She flew out to New York immediately, bringing gifts and advice. It's amazing what the gene pool will do to perpetuate itself. Anyway, when she left, I told Ozzy I hadn't changed my mind, but I did have a tiny doubt, and he noticed. He asked me to wait another week, which I did, and he used the time to do everything he could to convince me to have the baby. None of it worked, really, not even his home screening of Disney's Jungle Book, which I love. But I could see how much he wanted to have this baby, and it moved me. I decided to take another week to think about it, then another week, and the more I thought about it, the less power I seemed to have to end it. I felt guilty. More than that, I felt selfish. I tried to convince myself that I wanted the child as well, that childbirth was an expression of female power, that it would make our bond even stronger. So the week turned into weeks. Eventually we had a sonogram done, and after that the idea was a little person, growing, and it was too late to turn back. I resigned myself to it. Or maybe I saw it as a kind of martyrdom, sacrificing myself for something noble, for love, my man, the species. I don't think I realized how frightened I was until the 3rd trimester, when the nightmares started. Nightmares inspired by the Discovery Channel. Visions of being eaten alive by larvae, like some poor animal stung by an insect and made into a host for its eggs. Ozzy, my friends, even people at work asked me why I looked so upset. But I could hardly tell them. Most mothers glow when they're pregnant. I sweated. Labor hurt like hell. I swore like a sailor the entire time. When they gave me the baby, I thought of a farewell to arms, because it did look like a skinned rabbit with a wrinkled old man's face. I asked if something was the matter with it, and they said it was perfectly healthy and a boy. The baby started sucking on my breast, and it seemed to know what it was doing, so I let it be. Ozzy said, "You look like you're in shock." And I said, "So would you." And the nurse said it was only natural. Meanwhile, I kept feeling the cropped stump of the baby's umbilical cord pressing into me, and eventually I got so sick that I threw up. The next day they wheeled me out of the hospital like a cripple, but then I had to walk to a cab. At first, the baby was like a science class. I learned how to use new equipment, how to pump, sterilize, clean, burp, wrap, powder, and the experiment, my son, seemed to be going well. I stared at him for hours because he was such an odd little thing, with his big head and eyes like slits and fat, slow hands. He was new, and he kept me busy, and for a while, I didn't worry. Ozzy couldn't get enough sex in those first few months after Muazzam was born, which was fine with me once I'd had a little recovery time, because my drive had always been more powerful than his. You learn a lot about your man when you become the mother of his child. Ozzy began drinking my milk and talking like a little boy when we made love. Now, I'm no prude. I've done my fair share of role-playing, and I've sampled all kinds of kink. But this, coming from him, took me by surprise. Not that I minded. What I did mind was that we had no time to talk about ourselves anymore. We just played with the baby and watched the baby and screwed. And then he went to work and I stayed home. When we did talk, it was almost always about Muazzam. I started to get bored. And then I started to get frightened. Because when I looked at the little mass of flesh I'd produced, I didn't feel anything. My son, my baby, my little Janu, my one and only, I felt nothing for him. No wonder, no joy, no happiness. Nothing. My head was full of a crazy silence, the kind that makes you think you're hearing whispers and wonder whether you're going insane. Meanwhile, Ozzy was having a ball. He enjoyed building tax shelters in exotic places. His clients took an instant liking to him and his golf game improved. His friends at the office said he might even make partner. And he loved his son. He would come home exhausted, much too exhausted for sex or a quiet conversation over a glass of wine, but not too exhausted to play with Muazzam until he went to bed. I felt neglected, resentful at being the one left at home when I hadn't wanted to have a baby in the first place. Things came to a head when Muazzam was 6 months old. I decided I wanted to work full-time again. Ozzy was shocked. He said Muazzam was too young. I said if he felt so strongly, he could ask for paternity leave. But he won the argument. He won it with a low blow. He looked at me like I was a stranger and asked if I loved our son at all. The question destroyed me. I started sobbing, and I couldn't stop. I'd done everything I was supposed to. I'd played with Muazzam and read to him, even though he couldn't understand a word, and bought him clothes, and fed him with my own body, and cleaned his shit with my own hands. I felt so guilty. I knew there was something wrong with me. I was a monster. But I didn't want to be. Staying with my baby was the right thing to do, what everyone expected of me. My mother would agree with Ozzy, even my friends. So I gave in. I said I'd write freelance from home. I didn't tell Ozzy why I'd cried. He didn't ask. He just hugged me. And even though I needed him to, it felt empty. Ozzy had found my weak spot. He may not have understood why, but he now knew he could make me do things I didn't want to do. And that's an awful power to give one person in a relationship. It killed our marriage. I think it would kill anyone's. But it takes a long time for a good marriage to die, and even a dead marriage can pretend to be alive, with habit as respirator and heart machine. We stayed in America for another 2 years, and people thought we were happy. We were invited everywhere, and we entertained lavishly. But we never could find a babysitter Ozzy approved of. Every month or two he made me get a new one. Sometimes I would explode at Ozzy, and then he would take me seriously, almost become the Ozzy I'd fallen in love with. But only for an hour or two. After a while, I found that I was getting angry at him just for attention, which made me feel like such an infant that I stopped doing it. Ozzy still came to me when he needed to be held and comforted, and I was so lonely that I was grateful for the opportunity. But my resentment grew. I had 2 selfish children on my hands, and they were making me miserable. I started drinking scotch, neat, during the day. I didn't tell anyone how I really felt. Not my best friends, not my mother, and certainly not my husband. It was a new experience for me. I'd never been ashamed of anything I'd done in my life. But this wasn't something I'd done. This was me. Not an act, but an identity. I disappointed me, shamed me. So I hid my secret as well as I could. And to do that, I had to hide it from myself. Perhaps the strangest thing of all was what I was writing. After trying my hand at a few edgy pieces, and finding it a nightmare to get them published, I wrote an article on lullabies for a woman's magazine. Really, I put an international spin on it, interviewing friends who came from all over the planet. Enough to put anyone to sleep, I thought. But I was wrong. It was a hit. The magazine was flooded with letters, and I was asked for more. So I did one on herbal remedies for diaper rash and vegetable balms for baby skin. Another winner. I kept writing, glad for the distraction from the constant demands of my son. The income was important to me as well. Between Ozzy and his parents, we had everything we needed. But the idea of taking pocket money from my husband had begun to grate on me. So I managed to earn some financial independence writing about parenting. Little hypocrite that I am. It was satisfying in a strange way, and in a not-so-strange way, too. The strange satisfaction came from at least being able to write about motherhood well. It helped me hide from myself. And the not-so-strange satisfaction came from learning that I was a good writer, feeling new muscles growing in my back, wing muscles, the kind that mean you're learning to fly. But it wasn't the right season to lift off. Not yet. I sat in my apartment and looked out over the city, and I just didn't feel any passion to write about the place. I didn't give a damn about local politics. I wasn't moved by the issues. I missed home. And I was frustrated by people who actually thought the world had a center, and that center was here. The world's a sphere, everyone, I wanted to say. The center of a sphere doesn't lie on its surface. Look up the word superficial when you have a chance. Slowly, even though I thought it would never happen, New York lost its charm for me. I remember arriving in the city for the first time, passing with my parents through the first World Club's bouncers at immigration, getting into a massive cab that didn't have a moment to waste, and falling in love as soon as we shot onto the bridge, and I saw Manhattan rise up through the looks of parental terror reflected in the window. I lost my virginity in New York. Twice. The second one had wanted to believe he was the first so badly. I had my mind blown open by the combination of liberal arts education and a drug-popping international crowd. I became tough. I had fun. I learned so much. But now, New York was starting to feel empty. A great party that had gone on too long and was showing no sign of ending soon. I had a headache, and I was tired. I'd danced enough. I wanted a quiet conversation with someone who knew what load shedding was. Then, Ozzy decided he'd had enough of being a well-paid small fish in Manhattan. His father needed him, and he wanted to go home. I agreed. I was desperate for a new start, too. So we took a deep breath and jumped and landed with a loud splash one summer in beautiful Lahore. But Lahore wasn't the answer. I didn't know anyone. I had nothing to do, and I hated living with Ozzy's parents. At least Muazzam's new nanny was a blessing. For the first time since before he was born, he wasn't completely dependent on me, and that was liberating. I started thinking about what I wanted to do with my time, and then about what I wanted to do with my life. My 26th birthday reminded me that I was still young. I tried to restart my marriage, to rediscover everything that had made me love Ozzy in the first place. Honestly, I did. But it didn't work, because I lost my respect for him. And once that happened, there was nothing more I could do. How do you lose respect for the person you love? It isn't easy. It took a lot. It took his mother, for one thing. She'd spent half her life making her son into the man she'd wished she had married, and now that he'd returned, she was back in business. She corrected his posture, critiqued his suits, made him self-conscious about his receding hairline by telling him again and again how a good haircut would hide it. And the effect she had on him was incredible. One look from her would transform the relaxed, charming, sexy man I'd married into an uncomfortable little schoolboy. But it took more than his mother to utterly destroy my respect for Ozzy. It took his father, too. No matter how much I wanted to believe otherwise, I quickly realized that the rumors about Ozzy's father being corrupt were true. And when I finally, delicately confronted Ozzy, he seemed almost surprised that it bothered me. In fact, he said one of the main reasons he'd come back to Lahore was to help his father protect his assets. Kickbacks from the good old days when Dad was a senior civil servant with the country at his feet. Even then, I might have stayed with my increasingly emasculated, amoral husband for quite some time. It took some serious miscalculations on his part to extinguish the last, lingering, stubborn spark of respect I had for him. It took one manipulative comment too many, one more comparison of myself to his perfect mother than I could take. I didn't confront him. I just gritted my teeth, took out a needle, and worked him out of my heart like a splinter. But I still wasn't ready to leave him. It might seem strange, after everything I've said, that Muazzam should prevent me from leaving my husband. But he did. I still wanted to believe that I loved my son, that I was a good mother, that I was a good person. I knew it would be wrong to abandon him, and I knew I couldn't take him with me. I couldn't bear it, having sole responsibility for the child. I didn't trust myself, and I didn't want to. But a crack down my middle was splitting open, and I couldn't be just the good wife and mother anymore. So how did I, after being faithful for 4 years of marriage, come to start having sex with my husband's best friend? It all began with writing under a pseudonym. A double life has to begin somewhere. There has to be a first lie, a first deception. And mine began when I decided to start working as an investigative journalist called Zulfikar Manto. It wasn't because Ozzy would have objected that I didn't tell him. He married a woman he slept with on the first night, remember that? He wasn't a close-minded man. It was because I wanted to create a life that he knew nothing about. But as soon as I began, wings that had been growing for years stretched and pushed, and I found myself flying. I was home again, and there was so much I wanted to say. I found myself sitting up all night at the computer, writing with all of my soul, the window open and my wrists sweaty against the keyboard as Ozzy slept under his blanket in the next room. I spoke with prostitutes and policemen who might have killed a girl, and lawyers who gave safe haven to fugitive women from abusive marriages, and an accountability commission investigator with one arm and a grip so strong my hand hurt for days. I wrote about things people didn't want seen, and my writing was noticed. Zulfikar Manto received death threats and awards. And the more I wrote, the more I loved home. I was back. I was finding myself again, and I was being honest about things I cared for passionately. Childbirth had hurt me inside, and I was finally starting to heal. When I met Darashiko Shehzad, I didn't know whether I was going to sleep with him, but I knew I wanted to. He seemed the perfect partner for my first extramarital affair. He was smart and sexy, and since he was one of Ozzy's best friends, I knew he'd keep his mouth shut. It was fantastic. We had a delicious courtship, slow and exquisite, because we both felt so guilty. Sex was a revelation, being touched by another man, declaring my independence from the united state of marriage, remembering myself by being felt for the first time. We smoked joints and talked for hours and made each other laugh. I once went to a coffee party where rich young wives sat around and moaned about being bored while their husbands were at work, and I laughed at them afterwards because I knew that I had a lot to do. It wasn't until later that I realized they did too. Affairs were the most popular form of entertainment around, and I know why. My affair with Daru was, at first at least, the most liberating experience I have ever had. I felt bad, of course, selfish, but I also felt good. The problem was that I started to get under his skin, and he, in a very different way, started to get under mine. I'll tell you more later.